As you know, we're going to talk about giants, records, and amazing history. I'm going to be using my notes tonight a lot. There's a ton of information here, and there's excerpts and things I need to read to you, and so I am going to follow these notes and make it go fast so I can pack it all in, okay? It was over 60 years ago that John Brewer discovered an extraordinary cave. You probably all heard stories, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of good information too, but I've left out some things that are really interesting just because I wasn't sure. I didn't feel good enough to me that the source was accurate enough, okay? But I do believe that John Brewer's story is true, at least plausible, and tonight I'll tell you why I feel that way. But as always, I leave it up to you to draw your own conclusions, okay? And if you don't like some of what I say tonight, well, don't shoot the messenger. Our story begins with two young boys, Lone Eagle and George Keller. George grew up in Manti and spent a lot of time roaming the hills of San Pete Valley with Lone Eagle, his boyhood Indian friend. They were out hiking one day when they came across a place that Lone Eagle recognized. He called it the Cave of the Great Spirit. Now, Lone Eagle's father had shown this to him when he was about 6 years old. He explained that it was a sacred burial place protected by the spirit of a great Indian chief. The boys often played there, using it as a hideaway and making fond memories. Later in life, Keller actually fell from his horse during a snowstorm, and he got frostbite in his fingers and lost all of his fingers down to the first joint. So, by the 1950s, he was an older gentleman struggling to provide for himself, considered a drunk by some, but he was honest and respected by many in the community when he crossed paths with John Brewer. Now, this is John and Doris Brewer, the year that he found the cave. In 1955, Earl John Brewer was 22 years old, living in Manti and working at odd jobs to support his young wife and family. He often gathered arrowheads from the hills and valleys of San Pete. Hoping to display his arrowhead collection in the county fair, he was making a beautiful Indian bust when he realized that he didn't have enough arrowheads to finish the project. So he heard about George Keller and that he knew of a place to find arrowheads. In exchange for a bottle of wine, Keller told John Brewer about the Cave of the Great Spirit out behind the Manti Temple. Brewer couldn't find it the first time he went and looked, so he offered Keller another bottle of wine to show him himself. He did. They drove up the hill behind the temple. Keller parked the truck and pointed out an opening. Brewer went up there and found 30 arrowheads right off. He later commented, "No wonder I couldn't find it. It wasn't on the temple hill at all. It was the one in back of it." And thus began the adventure of a lifetime. Fortunately for us, John Brewer kept a journal. He wrote of his discoveries, his methods, his descriptions of the items that he found. He also spoke of going to the cave to work, to study, to think, even just to ponder sometimes. It sort of became like his refuge from life. Now, the published portion of the journal has caused a bit of controversy because John Brewer said that no one had seen his journal. However, quoting Terry Carter, founder of the Ancient Historical Research Foundation, just like John Brewer's cave, his journal has also spawned great debate as to its authenticity. While researching and interviewing people over the years, I have come to the confident conclusion that this is indeed John Brewer's own excerpts from his personal journal. Now, I think most of you know Terry Carter. Terry, where are you? Raise your hand. Terry has done a tremendous amount of research on this subject. He has very generously shared it with me to share with you. A lot of what you hear tonight came from the files of Terry Carter. So I'd like to give him a round of applause. Now, as we follow the journal excerpts, we really get a feel for the kind of man that John Brewer was. How he felt, seeing the things that he saw firsthand. Just 1 week after Keller showed him the cave, he wrote in his journal, "I went to the cave and moved a little dirt." It wasn't long before he began finding artifacts of great interest. In addition to arrowheads and Indian drill and pottery, he found a little book. The book had marks on the front page, a scorpion motif, which he said looked like it was stamped rather than cut or engraved. The book was covered with a mud-like pottery, very hard to remove. It had a ring on one side and a copper band on the other to hold it together. He found a little gold plate as well in the early stages. He also found an inscribed bell-like object made of lead. At this point, he had only dug down about 4 or 5 feet. Now, he eventually found at least 2 of these bells, but if you have a good eye, you can tell that that's 2 photos of the same bell. He found several more pieces of lead, as you see here. He also found objects of wood, something resembling a metal chisel, but it was too soft to really work as one, and also a 28-inch inscribed stone. One very interesting item that he found early on was a chunk of pine gum. He tossed it aside, thinking that he might chew on it later on. It was several months later before he decided to take it home and cut it open and see if there might be insects in it, similar to what we find in amber, which is also a resin. He said, "I didn't find any bugs, but there was a piece of some kind of bark or wood. I cut deeper into the pine gum and I found another piece of rock inside of it, but this piece didn't have the same kind of marks. I think that it is a map of some kind." Now, he told his friends about the map and that it was in pieces, several stone tablets that fit together. He thought, when they were fully assembled, that he only had about 2/3 of the full map, and he spent a lot of time trying to figure it out where it would, fit the area on the earth that it would actually cover. Well, he got a map of Utah, a paper map, and he cut it all up in the size that he thought these pieces of rock would cover. It didn't work. The size was all wrong. So he tried to tape the map back together and start over, but really he had to just go get another map and start from square one. 4 months later, he thought he had it all figured out. He thought it was up in northern Utah, so he bought a nicer car that would actually get him up there and back. Drove up to the area, but nothing matched up at all. So he realized it was time to start all over again. Ultimately, it was another 4 years before he finally realized that the map matched the Sanpete Valley, or at least part of it. The full map is said to have extended from Canada to Mexico and as far east as Kansas. It apparently showed a central location with these little footprints that would go out to other locations. The other sites were supposedly burials and repositories. Now, reports vary as to how many locations were on the map, but supposedly 6 or 7 of those were in Sanpete. We know he found at least 2, probably 3 of those locations, one near Spring City and one across the valley near Wales. He found inscribed stones over there, and this is one that was accidentally broken when he struck it with a pick. Now, his reading of the map rock was accurate within 15 to 20 feet of the target. Using compass skills that he learned in the Army, he located the first site, dug down a ways where the lines had crossed, and circled out from there. By the time he had dug out about 15 feet, he found the landmark and knew that he had it right. Another site was marked on the map, and it was supposed to be an ancient library, a large repository of records. The site should have been on the west side of the Sanpete Valley on a bald spot often called West Point that you can see the arrow pointing to there. According to the map, the library would be marked with a certain symbol. Now, John Brewer spent a lot of time searching for that symbol but was never able to find it. He decided that it just wasn't meant for him. As many of you may already know, there are very interesting antiquities all across Sanpete. I'm going to show you a few of them just to give you an idea of the diverse history of the area, and then we'll get back to the cave. Now, here are a few sites on the west side of the valley. There are ancient structures of some sort, possibly tombs, don't know what they are. There are mounds, rock walls, stone floors, all kinds of interesting things. A cement sample taken from under this stone floor was analyzed, and the report reads, "Under the microscope, the sample appeared to be a prehistoric formation, a mortar that was mixed anciently, similar to the ancient Egyptian mortars." Now, this Hebrew mound near Spring City was shown to me by Dan and Jean Nielsen. The Strait family owns this man-made hill with sloped sides and a flat top. It was identified by Professor Lambert Dolphin as a Hebrew watchtower mound and is similar to those scattered across the Holy Land. Scans have shown that an ancient rock wall lies 3 feet beneath the surface of this mound. It is also rumored that Dr. Paul Chessman found 3 small metal plates buried in this hill. I've not been able to verify the location of those plates, though. Here are a few interesting anomalies recorded by the early settlers of the Sanpete Valley. The old stone quarry in Manti Canyon had been used anciently for extensive building projects. While working at the quarry, William Potter turned over a large stone to discover that the underside had been sculpted with several figures of heads resembling those found on ancient Greek temples. Orson Pratt believed that one of the figures was a representation of Zeus, and that the 2 main sculptures were identical to those found on ancient Greek temples, such as the Temple of Athena at the Acropolis. Sophus Jensen said, the ancient inscriptions at the stone quarry were identical to the Greek inscriptions on Temple Hill. And it goes on. Pete Wilson spoke of a foundation stone excavated from a cavern beneath the temple inscribed with Greek letters. It could still be seen by accessing the temple basement. Adelia Sidwell said, as kids, we used to play on the south side of Temple Hill up near the top where the big rock protruded with strange old writing on it. Isaac Morley climbed the south slope to examine the large stones worked by human hands thought to be the remains of the foundation of an ancient temple. He made copies of the stone inscriptions, compared them to the books, and found 17 likenesses, 14 unidentified, and several others unintelligible. Now, I hiked along the crest of the south slope, all along there looking at all the rocks, and there doesn't seem to be any of those particular inscriptions left. Now, Chief Walkera of the Sanpete Utes recounted that the old ones had built a stone altar with strange carvings on its base at the crest of the sacred hill where the Manti Temple now resides. It was disassembled by the Spaniards in search of gold and riches. Early settlers could still see the remains. When Brother Gifford accidentally split open one of the stones, he found it to be hollow and said that it appeared to be an ancient repository of records. It seems that many cultures have contributed to the ancient history of the Sanpete Valley. Now, several petroglyph panels were marked on the map rock that Brewer found. Ones in Pocatello, Cedar City, Nephi, Ogden, etc. These that you see here are above the Manti Quarry on the northeast side of the Temple Hill. On the left, you'll see the ledges where these panels are located, and on the right are the close-ups of the 2 panels. The glyphs, which are often called mystery glyphs, or Western message glyphs, seem to be a mixture of Ojibwa, Egyptian, Aztec, Mayan, Hebrew, and other cultural symbols. Some claim these are modern creations. They could be. The small panel is indeed very crisp and clear, the larger panel not so much. Professor James Harris and others claim that they are very old, possibly even more than 2,000 years. On the lower left, circled in red there, you'll see what some believe is an ancient carved head of a serpent, similar to those found in Central America. Now, another interesting record on stone that comes from this same area, if this is the correct panel, this is all that's left of it, and I do think that's it. Now, these are pecked into the outer layer of the stone, which is falling right off the boulder. You can see that, so it's almost gone. Nevertheless, it was translated in 1856 as I, Mahuntai, the second king of the Lamanites, in 5 valleys in the mountains, make this record in the 1200th year since we came out of Jerusalem. And I have 3 sons gone to the south country to live by hunting antelope and deer. Professor James Harris verifies this interpretation, adding that it is a mixture of Egyptian and Utah Fremont. If the region's translation was correct, that would have been inscribed in 600 AD. Okay, so let's get back to our story. We're going to do a lot of deviation like that, and then we'll get back to the story. John Brewer spent many long hours in the cave. He didn't just carelessly dig up this cave. He got a book on archaeology. He carefully filled bottles with soil samples. He took notes on everything that he did and what he was collecting. He recorded all of it. He could tell that the Indians had been inside this cave, but as he dug down, He uncovered the remains of other cultures that he believed had used this cave for over a span of several thousand years. Sincerely wanting to understand what he was finding, he was very prayerful. He humbly studied about receiving answers to prayer. He sent a letter to the church representatives, church authorities, for help, and waited a long, long time for an answer. But meanwhile, he attended church, trying to find the answers there. June 17, 1957, 2 years after he first visited the cave, John Brewer wrote in his journal, "I seem to feel sometimes that I'm being watched, but when I check and see, I see no one, but the feeling will not leave. Even when I'm in the cave, I get it real strong, but when I go outside, it leaves me." Sometime later, he went up to the cave to think. He felt the presence of another person in the room who held a light. His first impression was that he had been followed. He was then seized upon by a force of power that threw his body to the ground and left him looking at his body from above. The personage introduced himself as Ether, an ancient spirit. Ether told him that he was not to seek financial gain from the things in the chamber, but was given the charge to protect the discovery. He was also told that the LDS Church authorities should be informed about the find, but that they were not to be involved at this time. Brewer actually felt very unworthy to be the custodian because he smoked and he drank a little and wasn't exactly active in the church. But Ether told him that he had other attributes and should be very careful in protecting the contents of the cave. Brewer progressed. While digging out the upper chamber where the arrowheads and the artifacts and things were, John Brewer discovered some stairs. They led down into another chamber. It was a room with a furnace at one end and had clearly been used for some time as a workroom. There were numerous records, artifacts, and tools inside. Some were stored in stone boxes, some were wrapped in seaweed, others in cedar bark. He found stone forms for shaping plates, a hammer, and 50 little chisel-type tools apparently used to inscribe plates, as well as copper tubes that were used for pencils. There were also brass, gold, and copper cups, stone slabs so large that he couldn't move them himself. He spoke of little 3-inch by 4-inch books made of copper and gold, bound with rings like a loose leaf binder. Some of the items actually appeared to have come from South America. Now, he made a sketch of the cave. You see it up here on the left with 2 different views. The one on the top is like a bird's eye view looking down on it. The T-shape in the center there was all unexplored area. As far as we know, he never did dig that out. The bottom of that same drawing shows a horizontal view so you kind of see into the cave. And then the artwork on the right, that was done by his granddaughter, Trisla Brewer. That really gives a good feel for what the tomb looked like. Taking a closer look, each item is numbered in red, and I'll just go through this kind of fast so you can see the layout. Number 1 is the unexplored area. Number 2 is a bench containing artifacts. Number 3 is a wall of stone boxes. Now, he didn't notice that at first. It looked like a normal dirt wall. But at some point, water had come up through a hole in the bottom of the tomb and washed away some of the mud, exposing a little bit of bark. He looked closer at that strange bark sticking out and realized the wall was made of stone boxes wrapped in juniper bark and pine pitch, stacked up kind of like bricks, made into the wall and then smeared with mud. Number 4 is a new 30-foot entry into the tomb, which may have been the old furnace chimney. He was worried that someone would find the tomb, so he made a new access and concealed that with a large flat rock and brush, and then he closed the old entrance with dynamite. Number 5, stairs leading from the upper chamber down into the tomb. Number 6, a bottomless pit and natural death trap. That was probably covered with small sticks and dirt at one time so you couldn't see it. Number 7 is safe passage around that last step. For those that knew about the tomb, this was the safe way in and out, bypassing the death trap. But if you didn't know and went straight down, you would surely fall to your death. No one knows exactly how deep that pit was. Number 8 is a shelf containing dust, painted pottery, and a detailed copper bracelet in the design of a rattlesnake that coiled around the arm, and he said that it looked like it at one point had something in the eyes, like jewels or something. Number 9 is a wooden bench made and used by John Brewer while working on the maps. Sitting on top of that bench is a small box where he put his diary and records. Number 10 is a box with a metal cover containing his prized artifacts. He put them there after he finished recording them. Number 11 is a box containing the Spanish armor that he found on the west side of the valley. Number 12, he made another amazing discovery, 2 stone sarcophagi containing very large mummified bodies stacked one above the other. Unable to take photos of the bodies, sketches were drawn. It's been suggested that the presence of radon gas would explain why he could not get good photographs with those old Polaroid cameras. Now, I've been told it was actually his son, John, that was the artist here. These are photos of the general area where Brewers Cave should be found. Lone Eagle, George Keller, John Brewer, they weren't the only ones that hiked those hills and explored holes and caverns. Maud Cox was an elderly woman whose family owned high ground to the north of the temple near the Keller farm. As a little girl, she had heard her family speak of the discovery of a cave or tomb that required a ladder to gain entrance. There was a long, narrow passage that led to a chamber where artifacts and a burial site were located. She did not know the location of the chamber, but George Keller had told her of a certain mark located near the cave of the Great Spirit. Could Brewer's Cave have been the same place that her family discovered years ago? Very probably, or I should say possibly. Lucian Baum tells a similar story. As young boys, Lucian and his friends dared each other to go into a small cave they had discovered in the hills. There was a drop-off inside, and they tossed rocks in to see how deep it would go. They couldn't hear the rocks land, so as kids would, they figured it went all the way to China. One of the boys reached into the hole and came out with part of a step from an old stick ladder that had been tied on with rawhide. Years later, one of the boys decided to dig a mine shaft-type tunnel about 25 feet below the opening to see if he could find the bottom. He did. He realized they hadn't heard the rocks falling in the hole because the bottom was covered in several inches of what he called flour dust. He found a large rock wall, tunneled around it, only to realize that it was actually a stone coffin. He said that he used a tire iron to pry the lid up and saw the remains of a mummy. Again, we wonder if they happened upon what later became known as Brewer Cave, or at least something similar. Finally, the long-awaited meeting with church representatives, March 1st, 1974. Dr. Paul Chessman of the Department of Religion at BYU, his wife Millie, Marky Peterson of the Quorum of the 12, J. Golden Barton, and Wayne Handy met with John Brewer and his son at the home of Bishop Merlin Nielsen to discuss the Brewer Cave. Brewer had waited many years for this, and he was eager to tell them the story of the cave, the stone boxes, the records, and especially the giant remains. The group listened intently. They were excited and very impressed, especially when he reached into his briefcase and pulled out, about 60 plates inscribed with characters of an unknown writing. The plates presented were of various sizes, shapes, and metallurgical composition. Brewer showed them these 7 gold plates, which he had placed in a picture frame under glass for their protection. And here are a couple of lead plates in the shape of a man's head. A cast and replica was made of that one, and if you notice, the actual size fits right into his hand. The one on the right, of course, has a spiraled inscription. Lucian Baum handled these plates when he was asked to photograph them. He commented that the lead plates were so soft they would start to mold right to your hand as you held them. There were plates of hardened copper so hard that a file could not scratch them. J. Golden Barton said some of the copper plates were a strange composition, shattering like glass into fibrous pieces if dropped. The pieces were also so sharp that they would actually cut your fingers. So, those at the meeting were all united in the opinion that Brewer was telling the truth. Brewer agreed to take Dr. Paul Chessman to the tomb as soon as the snow melted. The plan was to have an archaeological team from BYU follow up with a necessary evaluation. Sadly, though, this never happened. Chessman was a large man, and Brewer was trying to widen the access tunnel to fit Chessman in. He was even trying to put some carpet in the bottom because he felt that a man like Paul Chessman shouldn't have to scoot along in the dirt. But the tunnel ceiling caved in at one point. And then many personal problems further delayed the plan. Controversy began to swirl. He had shown some of the artifacts to priesthood quorums, school children, friends, and neighbors. The stories and the artifacts were attracting ill-intentioned people. Items were stolen from his roadside museum. He was threatened, and he soon began to fear for his life and the lives of his family. He became the subject of critical newspaper articles, as you see here. Dr. Jesse Jennings, Dr. Ray Matheny were both very critical of him and claimed he was a fraud. Understandably, Brewer was embarrassed and felt betrayed. BYU, University of Utah, and Dr. Paul Chessman all had obtained artifacts of Brewer's. Up here, you'll see the artifacts on the left with the description in the middle and results on the right. I'm not going to read that, I'll just paraphrase. It was determined that all the inscriptions were sharp and clear, therefore interpreted to be modern. Also, some of the cotton fibers and pitch wrapping did not seem old. So clearly not very favorable results. Dr. Jennings of U of U called it a ridiculous hoax, but in all fairness, he had his mind made up that the whole story was a fraud before he ever even saw the artifacts. Dr. Matheny of BYU felt that the inscriptions were too sharp and clear to be ancient, so he said it was a clumsy attempt at fraud. Dr. Chessman was the only one to speak positively, and he maintained that they could be real. Now, cryptologist Dr. William Adams with BYU took a look at the linguistics. He states, I found so few clusterings that from a language point of view, I am forced to conclude that instead of meaningful script, the work was the haphazard scratchings of a forger. Sadly, the inscriptions were dismissed because they cannot be read. Now, these very same men went to a luncheon at the Winch home. The table was set with napkins printed with registered cattle brands in honor of Mrs. Winch's late husband, who was a cattleman. When the cryptologist opened his napkin, he was dumbfounded. There he saw what he thought were the very same characters from the tablet he had examined. He was convinced that Brewer's inscriptions had been copied from the local brands. Now, pictured up here is the script from the stone tablet in question and a photo of the napkin. A close look at the napkin shows that these brands were far from local. They extend the entire length of Utah, making one wonder, would Brewer really be familiar with cattle brands from Randolph all the way to St. George? The brands are also, of course, variations of letters and symbols. Understandably, they will resemble characters from many languages. However, we do know that there was some fraud. Brewer admitted to participating in the manufacture of items, particularly lead. It was his way of showing people what he had found without taking the chance of losing things. It was also an effective way to test the integrity of people. If he loaned them a plate and they never gave it back, he knew they could not be trusted. We should also consider that those stone forms that were in the cave would make it relatively easy to melt down some inexpensive lead and cast some new plates. Now, what you see up here is a so-called gold plate, but it was subjected to X-ray spectrograph analysis. The plate is not gold at all. It is brass, consistent with the cartridge of a rifle bullet. Now, I don't know if the next one is fraudulent or coincidental, but does that look like Snoopy to you?
Yep.
Since Brewer was unable to get photos inside the cave, items were removed, and Bishop Merlin Nielsen covered the cost to have them photographed by Lucian Bown, who was a professional photographer for the church. Quoting here from J. Golden Barton, when he had completed his work, he mailed President David O. McKay a complete collection of the photographs. In return, he received a letter from the president of the LDS Church asking him to seal the negatives, which he claims to have honored to this day. Only Brewer has copies of the photographs. But actually, there were two men from Idaho posing as university officials who purchased copies of the prints. They paid with a check that did not clear, and sadly, Brewer never saw them again. By this time, he was very disappointed and determined to have no further contact with BYU. He retained a respect for Dr. Chessman, but avoided contact with both church and university officials. Brewer's admission of fraud was understandably a setback for Chessman, Barton, Handy, and their associates, but they continued to support him and his efforts for many, many years. It is notable that other tombs and treasures were discovered in the surrounding area, particularly during the 1970s. Pictured here is an empty tomb south of Manti, believed by some to have been Brewer Cave. Recently, a friend of mine tells this story. While serving in the South San Pete stake in 1974, Bishop was called to meet at the Manti Temple one evening. The bishops and stake presidency were taken to a corner of the temple lot where a chain link fence was being installed. One of the workers had tried to put in a fence post where a hole in the ground had given way. He noticed unnaturally stacked stones nearby, and upon investigating, discovered an entrance to a cave with steps leading down. The chamber contained the remains of a man and a woman, and many records upon tablets. The bishops and stake presidency spent the night removing the contents of the cavern, which were later taken to Salt Lake, and a capstone was put over the entrance to the tomb. They were told never to talk about this. This man did talk, because he said he was no longer affiliated with the church. Most of those that were present at that meeting there had passed away, and he felt that it was time that someone knew what had happened there. So we went out to the area, and sure enough, there were shaped and stacked stones, as well as debris at the site matching the description. So if we are correct, this is what it looks like to me. If that's not it, it should be close by. We have another eyewitness account by a man named Jason Stevens. Jason Stevens was working on Chicken Creek near Wales several years ago when a man came into camp claiming that someone he knew had found 2 mummified giant bodies up there all decked out. This man had been up all night looking for the tomb. Jason thought it was a lie, and he said so, but the next week the man was up there again, and this time he showed Jason a huge breastplate from the tomb that must have weighed 65 to 70 pounds. He mentioned a sword, but he only showed Jason the breastplate. Now, the tablet up there is purported to have been found on Chicken Creek. I have not been able to verify that, but it's interesting to see anyway. Another incident tells of a Forest Service employee hunting rabbits in Manti when he discovered several dozen metallic plates of various sizes inside a hole in the ground. He estimated that they would weigh 20 to 40 pounds. So, lots of stories. Okay, we're going to go back here and talk about the mummies. As I mentioned, these bodies were each laying in separate stone sarcophagus. With some difficulty, John Brewer pried off the lids, which were thick and smooth. He said that very little dust had made its way inside the boxes. There were 3 blankets coated with resin laying on top of each body. The top blanket fell apart, but the others remained intact as he pulled the straw-like cloth down to take a look. Careful not to disturb them, he observed that the male was approximately 9'2", had red hair, and was 3 to 4 feet across the shoulders. The female was approximately 8'10" and had blonde hair that remained intact when touched. The skin was still attached, soft, almost moist, and felt like tanned leather. They seemed to be about 40 or 50 years old at the time of death, and each had on an elaborate golden crown and breastplate. The remains were well preserved, and the only thing that crumbled were the feathers. This comes from the memoirs of Nakona Schaefer. She took notes when she visited with John Brewer. This artwork that you just saw there, and here larger, was done by his granddaughter, Trisla Brewer, again. You know, I can't help but wonder who these giant people were, what were they like, and of course we have to wonder, was John Brewer making this all up? Has anyone else recorded encounters with these giant people? Lots of questions. Well, apparently the Spaniards did encounter something. When Coronado marched his expedition across the American Southwest searching for the legendary 7 cities of Cibola, several tribes were mentioned as notably large: the Siri, the Cocopa, the Yuman, to name a few. In fact, when Alarcon brought his fleet into the lower reaches of the Grand Canyon, he came upon a settlement of an estimated 200 giant warriors. 1,000 more were reported upstream. Maldonado brought back with him an Indian so large and tall that the best man in the army reached only to his chest. Pedro de Castaneda reports, When they carry anything, they can take a load of more than 300 or 400 weight on their heads. Once, when our men wished to fetch a log for the fire and 6 men were unable to carry it, one of these giants is reported to have come and raised it in his arms, put it on his head alone, and carried it very easily. They were large and well-formed without being corpulent. Some have their nose pierced, and from them hang pendants, while others wear shells. All of them wear a multicolored sash about the waist and tied in the middle, a round bundle of feathers hanging down like a tail. Their bodies are branded by fire, their hair is banged in front, and in the back it hangs to the waist. A red-haired race of giants once roamed this land, yet the knowledge has been suppressed, hidden away by the Smithsonian and others. However, Native Americans have encountered these giant people and have known the legends for centuries. They used various names for them, some of which are listed here, not near all of them. I'll go through this kind of fast too. The Satika were red-haired, cannibalistic giants who plagued the ancestors of the Paiutes until they annihilated them. You may have heard the story of Lovelock Cave. The Allegheny, a giant race of mound builders encountered by the Lenni Lenape and others. The giant people were living east of the Mississippi, building forts and entrenchments. The Nahuo, a race of cannibalistic giants who once inhabited Tennessee, described by the Comanches as a rich and powerful race of white giants 10 feet tall who built mound cities and were wiped out by the Great Spirit for their pride and lack of mercy. The Stornake, the Navajo described them as a regal race of white giants endowed with mining technology who dominated the West. The Alihena, the Dene speak of this very tall, peace-loving people related to the cannibalistic warriors. They secluded themselves on Catalina Island to escape the wrath of those who feared them. Now, these are all reminiscent of the Adena, one of the 2 groups of mound builders known for their earthworks in the eastern United States, who lived approximately 1000 BC to 600 BC. These descriptions also bear a resemblance to the culture of the Jaredites that seemingly do not exist in the archaeological records. They call them howlers, laughable mistakes, or anachronisms, things that don't fit. Large people, ancient brass, stone boxes, metal plates, pre-Columbian writing, horses, chariots, wheat, elephants, and the list goes on. Interestingly, now that the suppressed knowledge of giants is coming to light, it's very interesting to find that the evidence of the very items on this list are found in ancient burials, many among the giant people. So, this is why we call them giants. We're not talking about 30-footers here. On the left is Harold Wadlow. He is 5'11". His son, Robert, stands 8'11". Robert had a disorder called gigantism and passed away in 1940. On the right is a 9-foot mummy from California discovered in 1895. The Brewers Cave mummies are said to be approximately the same size. Looking at these skeletons, on the left is a normal-sized one at 6 feet. The next one is 9 feet, the size of the Anakites mentioned in Deuteronomy. The next one is Goliath, also in the Bible, at approximately 10 feet tall. And then Og of Bashan at approximately 12 feet tall. Og was one of the Nephilim defeated by Moses. The Bible says that his bed was 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide, made of solid iron. I'd hate to have to move that. Evidence of the giant people, 7 to 12 feet tall, does exist in the archaeological record. Literally thousands of skeletal remains of a fair-skinned race of giants has been documented clear across America. This map does not show it, but in the state of Utah alone, we know of remains of giants in Salt Lake, Provo, Payson, Manti, Moab, Kanab, the Blue Mountains, Grand Gulch, Goshen Canyon, and more. These giants, often but not always, had red hair, enormous jaws that would fit over a normal-sized man's face, and double rows of teeth. On the left are double rows of teeth side by side, then on the top is a skull with vertical double rows of teeth. Both are purported to be like the giants. Below that is a skull with a very prominent jaw. Other anomalies have also been reported, strangely, things such as skulls with horns. Now, some of the giants had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Here are a few hands and feet with 6 digits. depicted on Native American rock art in Utah and also New Mexico. John Brewer didn't say whether the mummified remains that he found had extra teeth, fingers, or toes. He likely didn't even think to look. We know he didn't disturb them very much. But he did say large stature, blonde hair, and red hair. Between 1894 and 1920, Utah mummies made national news. Headlines read, "Science is stumped by strange mummies in Utah. No possible explanation yet to account for the red-headed, wavy-haired, perhaps white, race in America, thousands of years before the Indians or even the cliff dwellers." Museums at New York, Harvard, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Yale, and Denver universities all received their quota of the well-preserved mummies from Utah. But these institutions had to await the verdict of a Mr. Hyde of the American Museum of Natural History from New York before giving out any results of their own examination. I have no idea what the results were. I couldn't find them yet. So the Kansas Herald, the New York Times, the Washington Times all spoke of red-haired mummies. Quoting from the news, "There are legends of a fair people dwelling in the New World long before Columbus discovered it. In light of recent discoveries, science is turning away from its scornful disregard of these stories, which it has hitherto regarded as absurd. The mummies which have proven the existence of these red-haired, light-skinned Americans were found in caves under the houses of the cliff dwellers in Grand Gulch, southeastern Utah. They were not all giants, but among the collection is a male of giant stature so well preserved the mustache is still on his face." The mummies of Grand Gulch form the greatest riddle with which anthropologists have had to deal. No other known race has presented such perplexities. The basket type was that of the most ancient tribes of Egypt. Very curious matting or blanket of feathers, a layer of woven straw with colored symbols, then packed around with cedar bark. Sound familiar? Those layers were very similar to the ones in Brewers Cave, described as having the 3 resin-coated blankets, straw-like cloth, feathers, and connected with cedar bark. Now, I acquired these photos from my friend Dan Lowe. This is a 9-foot Mongolian-type male and an 8-foot red-haired woman found near Grande, Utah, in potholes bored from solid sandstone. You can see the pothole where the mummies were found, and I really don't know how they made that foot cast, but it measures 17 inches long. In the 1950s, Vaughn and Bruce Judd of Grande, Utah, uncovered a 9-foot African giant in Johnson Canyon, along with this small clay vessel made of boron, which held a little plutonium ball packed in the same type of organic material, some type of organic material. There was also a well-made fishing net and a woven textile made of camel hair. Robert Franzoni and Robert Shrewsbury had a forensic done on this textile. It dates to 1200 BC. In 1897, Goshen Canyon, in a 12 to 16-foot square chamber inside a cave, they found an arm bone of a man of gigantic proportions. The Salt Lake Giant. This is from the New York Sun, August 27, 1891. The gigantic skeleton of a man measuring 8'6" was found near the Jordan River just outside Salt Lake City by a workman who was digging an irrigation ditch. The skeleton was standing upright. The skull measured 11 inches in diameter and the feet 19 inches long. A copper chain to which was attached 3 medallions covered with curious hieroglyphics was found around the neck of the skeleton, and near it were found some copper medals. Archaeologists believe that the original owner of the skeleton belonged to the race of mound builders. Notice the medallion on the chest of the Brewers Cave mummy, and a close-up of another one from Brewers Cave. Here are a few more medallions from the cave. Now, some of these have drawings to show the detail. I know the photos are a little blurry, but the designs are interesting if you can make them out. And here are a few more. Now that we have access to the information regarding the burials of the giant people, we're going to compare some of the similarities between the documented giants and those from Brewers Cave, as well as the grave goods that were buried with them. The New York Times, July 14, 1916, from Ancient American Magazine, it says, "In the mound uncovered were found the bones of 68 men. The average height of these men was 7 feet, while many were much taller. Further evidence of their gigantic size was found in large celts or axes hewed from the stone and buried in the grave. So, with 68 giants in one mound, I think we can safely rule out that the giants are random victims of gigantism, as some archaeologists claim. Now, look at that circular object on his chest. Look familiar? Just like the one from Brewers Cave. On these next few slides, I'm just going to read the words in bold, so don't get lost, okay? Belt Mountains, Montana, 1889. A gold hunter, while prospecting the Belt Mountains, discovered a mysterious cavern. At the foot of the stairs was a skeleton of a man, 9'6". Underneath was a gold plate, 10 inches long, 6 inches wide, covered with strange devices. And then we have the Moundsville Giants, West Virginia, 1883. Giant skeletons were found. There was also a stone tablet on which were inscribed characters that resembled ancient hieroglyphics. Another skeleton was wearing pieces of mica on the shoulders, which appeared to be epaulets, shoulder pieces on the uniform, and a large piece of copper on the chest seemed to be a shield. As you can see, the Brewers Cave mummy had a sword, shield, and breastplate, and something that resembles epaulets. Gartersville, Mississippi, 1884. The discovery was of the remains of a giant wearing a copper crown. The bodies were encased in a network made of straw. The tomb was uncovered with large flagstones. The tomb was covered with large flagstones engraved with inscriptions. And then the Death Valley Giants, Nevada, 1947. Dr. Bruce Russell, following up on reports that the Smithsonian had hidden evidence of giants found in Death Valley. Imagine that. Reported finding 8 and 9 foot giants, hieroglyphics carefully chiseled onto polished granite, extensive weapons, and also the well-preserved remains of dinosaurs, saber-toothed tigers, imperial elephants, and other extinct beasts. Here you can see the dinosaur heads on the flagstones. Some claim they look like alligator heads or serpents, but they look more like dinosaurs to me. April 2015, the Ute Tribal Council met with Wayne May to discuss an ancient tomb located deep within the Ute Reservation, Uinta Mountains. The tomb contains skeletons 11 feet tall with red hair and decorated in full armor. The sarcophagus had a stone lid that swung open like a door. There was a polished granite stone 8 feet square with inscriptions on it, and many, many records inside the tomb, including numerous blackened plates of silver. The Utes told Wayne that they saw John Brewer going into the tomb and told him never, ever to come back. I wonder if that was another site marked on that map rock. While searching a cave near the Great Canyon of Barak de Cobra in northern Mexico in the early 1930s, explorer Paxton Hayes came across 34 mummified men and women. All had blonde hair. All rose to heights between 7 and 8 feet. Of course, the female in Brewers Cave had blonde hair. Catalina Island, California, 1920s. Professor Ralph Glidden and his team exhumed 3,781 skeletons of a blonde-haired race of giants. One king was 9 foot 2 inches tall, but the average height was 7 feet. He found that this highly intelligent, fair-skinned race thrived in the West 3,000 years ago. Among the items found were a thin piece of slate, a map rock showing trails to the 4 main burial grounds, similar to the Brewer map rock, while another included trinkets and small stone rings, such as the one shown here. In addition, the team found the remains of a megalithic Stonehenge-era temple. This is some actual photographs of Ralph Glidden and a 9-foot skeleton. L.A. Marzulli gave me this professionally analyzed photo. Calculating the distance, size, and placement of the skeleton, it was indeed about 9 feet tall. These photos show Glidden, his museum, and over 100 skulls lined up there like trophies. Apparently, the archaeological method here was quite barbaric. Now, I'm sure you've noticed the Brewers Cave woman is wearing a breastplate. This quote comes from Hugh Nibley. The Jaredites, whose kings are before everything leaders in the field, go to battle with their wives and their children, both men, women, and children being armed with weapons of war, having shields and breastplates, and being clothed after the manner of war. In Payson, Utah, 1870, 2 skeletons were found which had laid there 1,400 years. They were excavated. The male was 6 foot 7 inches and had a sword at his side. The tomb was described as a house with clay pipes with water conduction. There were skeletons and bones of all kinds of animals, including horses, and clay molds for casting iron implements. Wheat kernels were found inside a stone box. When planted, they grew to become the finest wheat crop in 5 Utah counties. I actually followed up on this wheat even as far as the United States Department of Agriculture seed bank. I was looking for some seed because I wanted to try it and see what it was like. They actually have this ancient mound wheat on record, and I have photographs of it growing in the fields of Nephi, but the actual seed has been lost for decades. And there is a connection between the female mummy's headdress and the ancient pueblos of the Southwest. The headdress is called a tablita. If you were to Google the word tablita, you would find that it is a Spanish word from the time of the conquest, which places it at 400 AD. But that's not entirely true. Among the Hopi, whose language descends from 1500 BC, tablita means crown. Pueblo Indian women still wear tablita for ceremonial dances in remembrance of the ancient ancestors. But most do not know the history of where it originated. Here are a few examples of the tablita on these Kachina dolls. According to Dr. James Harris, the scallops and squares are the American Indian sign for cloud altars, which the Hopi and Zuni regard as stairways to the sky or ascension into heaven. Some people are calling the giants cloud eaters. I've not yet figured out why, but I wonder if it has something to do with that. Ancient burials of the Southwest have produced such rare items as headdresses and copper bells. Rare, but they do occur. One child's burial included a copper bell and bead necklace. You can see here that her headdress has necklace-type bells on each side. Bells were also found with the controversial Padilla plates of Mexico. These examples of the tablita in Native American rock art are from Three Rivers, New Mexico. It's depicted various ways, as you see, but the meaning is still the same. Apache crown dancers represent the ancient mountain spirits of the 4 directions sent by the Creator to teach us to live in harmony. This dance is very, very old, and as you can see, the Apache use a type of tablita. So, for a quick review, here's a list of corresponding items between the documented burials of other giants and the Manti giants. In John Brewer's day, there was no internet, and this information was largely unavailable. The chances of him making up the whole story, in my opinion, are slim to none. As I've mentioned, the Smithsonian Institute has intentionally suppressed information regarding the giants. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. Within the ethnology reports of the museum, there are no less than 17 cases of the Smithsonian themselves uncovering giant skeletons over 7 feet tall. They were also given dozens of giant skeletons excavated by others. All of them have disappeared. Hugh Newman, co-author of the book Giants on Record, visited the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. in 2014. The workers there knew absolutely nothing of giants in the records. As I referenced earlier, Dr. Bruce Russell was investigating the giant Smithsonian cover-up clear back in 1947. Only now is this information being gleaned from old newspapers and reports and coming back into public awareness. A lot of people ask me, why? Why was the knowledge of our true history suppressed? Well, it's actually a really complicated issue that I can't go into, but the quick answer would be manifest destiny. Reading from up here, an attitude of prejudice spread among the academics of the Smithsonian. An increasing number of Americans regarded the natives as nothing more than savages who stood in the way of American expansion. Great effort was made to dispel the myth that a civilized race had existed here. The idea that the native people were intellectually inferior and had never achieved anything worth preserving has undoubtedly resulted in the tragic loss of some of America's most important cultural history. John Wesley Powell, E.G. Squire, and Lewis Henry Morgan were 3 highly influential men governing such organizations as the Smithsonian Institution. Both Powell and Squire's fathers were Methodist ministers in Palmyra, New York in the 1820s. These men began the wanton destruction of the ancient history of the Mound Builders civilization. That was a quote by Rod Meldrum. The photo here was the Honokia earthworks in Ohio, one of the intentionally destroyed icons of history. So let's take a look at some of the beautifully decorated stone boxes which were discovered inside Brewer Cave. You'll see some different styles. Some had little wooden pegs inserted into holes to hold the lids on, and many could be opened with a little stone key. This one has interesting markings of some sort. The symbol of the tablita is on the top. If you have a good eye, you might be able to see that. But definitely notice the ship on the side and the man with wings in the center of the lid. Very interesting. This one seems to depict a horse and chariot on the lid, and this particular box has 2 compartments. Several years ago, a similar stone box with several compartments was unearthed in the Manti area. A woman hiking up a ravine after a flash flood noticed a square corner sticking out from under a sagebrush. Upon investigating, she discovered an ancient-looking red stone box with intricate designs on it. It had several compartments similar to a jewelry box. A geologist looked at it. He did say it was ancient and that the stone had come from Wisconsin. Now this stone box is still wrapped in the juniper bark and pine pitch to make it waterproof. It has 1 small compartment with inscribed metal plates inside. Ancient writing on metal plates in North America, no less. The academic community may say that the ancients of North America did not write on metal plates, but we know that they did. There are records of the Taliwa, the Creek and Shawnee, the Michigan tablets, the Kinderhook plates, records of the Ojibwa, Navajo records, the Belt Mountain plate, the Brewer Cave plates, possibly the Padilla plates of Mexico, and probably many more. I'll go into a little more detail on some of these. The plates pictured here are actually from Brewer Cave, but according to Marilyn, a Navajo and current guardian of the ancient records of her ancestors, the Navajo have inscribed metal plates. Her great-great-grandmother had been on the Long Walk of 1864 when the Navajos were forced to walk 300 miles from Arizona across New Mexico to a new reservation. She was forced to trade some of the inscribed plates of her people to the soldiers for food. The rest were passed down to Marilyn's grandmother and then to her. Navajo records were passed from grandmother to the youngest granddaughter. Before Marilyn's grandmother passed away, she told her that there was an envelope hidden under the windowsill for her eyes only. Inside was a letter telling Marilyn that the sacred records were buried and where they were, and it's her job to watch over them today. Again, the plates pictured here are from Brewer Cave, but Chief Copley tells us that most Indian nations of the West have places in which they deposit their records. Ojibways have 3 depositories near Lake Superior where 10 guardians check on them every 15 years. If any of the guardians have died, others are chosen, and all the known information regarding the records is given to the new guardians. If any of the records have begun to decay, they are taken out and an exact facsimile is made and placed in its stead. These records are written on slate rock, copper, lead, and birch bark. The records are wrapped in swan or geese down and placed in a hollow log smeared with gum. It is said to be a transcript of what the Great Spirit gave to the Indian after the flood. Now, did you catch that part? An exact facsimile is made and placed in its stead. So, if records are found and the plate itself is determined to be modern origin, or if the inscription looks too sharp and clear, as was said of the Brewer Cave plates, it is still possible that the writing contains ancient history and should not be easily dismissed. The Brewer Cave plates definitely deserve another look. The Taliwa, a tribe descended from the mound builders, lived in the plateau region of the southwestern plains. Sometime before 1483, they were reduced through dire circumstances to a small remnant. Suffering much hardship, 25 emaciated survivors traveled east on foot for more than a year to live with the Cherokee relatives, bringing with them thin gold plates of their written language. The famous Cherokee Sequoyah was a descendant of the Taliwa people. In fact, he was the last scribe of the Seven Clans Society, a secret society that originated with the Taliwa. What most people do not know is that the original Cherokee Syllabary came from the writing on the Taliwa gold plates and was in use by the Cherokee since 1483, pre-Columbian. The symbols were identical or similar to letters and alphabets used by the Christians and Jews in the Middle East. Some were also found in the Jewish Kabbalah manuscripts. The current Cherokee Syllabary was not created until 1827 by Elias Boudinot, not Sequoyah, as we've been taught. This comes from Tell Them They Lie by by Traveler Bird. Cherokee tradition holds that the Taliwa writing system was obtained along the Etowah River in Georgia, but was also known by the Tuskegee Creeks in the Smoky Mountain region. The Tuskegee Creeks were known for their intelligence and powerful memories. The Creek also have a syllabary derived from the Taliwa gold plates, and it appears to be a simplified version of the older letters on this Creek document in the middle. It's hard to tell, but several characters on the Brewers Cave plate look very similar to these on the Creek document. A Mayan figurine near Atlanta, Georgia sported a headdress entirely of this same script, which also occurs among the petroglyphs of the American Southwest. What a strange connection, I think. Now, these were not the only metal records known by the Creek Indians. This was said of the Muskogee people. I will comment on each paragraph, so don't get lost. The Creek and Shawnee were known to have 2 brazen tablets and 5 of copper, which were given to them by the Great Spirit and handed down from time immemorial. For those who do not know, brazen means brass. Contrary to what academia says, there was ancient brass. The Creeks had brass tablets, Brewers Cave had brass, Kinderhook plates were brass, and breastplates of brass have even turned up in the Hopewell mounds. Lots of them. Oh, sorry. Continuing on, the crudely cut tablets were circular, oval, square, and spatula-shaped. I'm sure you noticed when I showed the Brewers Cave plates that they are also crudely cut and in a variety of shapes. Some of the Creek tablets resembled breastplates or shields of ancient soldiers with writing on them, which appeared to be Hebrew. They were sacred and brought out only once a year for the green corn ceremony. That is actually the same ceremony that the Pueblos used the tablita headdress for. The green corn ceremony is also very similar to the offering of the first fruits found in the Bible. And they once had many more inscribed plates, but they have buried them up in the graves of notable men. Perhaps like the Brewers Cave people. Even the headgear on this Creek warrior is strangely similar to the one in Manti. It has the same basic shape, the hair shows through, they both have whiskers on the top. I thought they looked very similar. Documented giants with writing or hieroglyphics included in the burial. This map was done by Cecilia Hall based on the research of Jim Vieira, Hugh Newman, Ross Hamilton, and other authors of the latest books on giants. It's still a work in progress. There is more than what you see here. And these included inscriptions were on stone, metal, and a variety of objects. Unfortunately, nearly all of the actual inscriptions have been lost. From the History of Muskingum County, Ohio, 1882, hieroglyphics with a biblical quote found in the Nephilim Giants' grave in Ohio. Removed from a burial mound that contained men and women buried in couples, their skeletons over 9 feet in length, was this tablet with a quote from the Bible. It says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, saith the Lord God, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty, giving first power on earth, secondly the Spirit, added from heaven without ending. The heavens declare the glory of God, a seal of his power to bless, first with life, and forever these servants." And then they explain, the discovery that Alpha and Omega are the first 2 characters of the inscription was as startling as it is true. The inscription on the tablet is composed of 3 different forms, Demotic, hieroglyphic, and Greek. The Demotic had ceased to be used by 425 BC. The inscription, therefore, must date back to at least 425 BC. This stone was roughly 12 inches square, and sadly, it's one of those that have been lost. Now, this so-called chunky stone disc came from a Georgia mound, homeland of the Creek Indians. Chunky was a game played on a rectangular field up to 47 acres in size. Spectators would line the edges, and the players would toss a chunky stone and then throw their spears to see who could get the closest to the disc. This particular one has an inscription on it, that's why I brought this up. And it compares to both the Brush Creek tablet that I just mentioned and items from Manti. So here I will show you. On the top left is the chunky stone disc from Georgia. Below that is the Brush Creek tablet from the giant burial. Everything else came from the tomb in Manti. You can see the similarities in the script as well as several exact matches. It appears to be the same writing system. The correlations on the next few slides get kind of complicated, so Pay close attention, all right? I don't want to lose you. According to Richard Thornton, a Creek Indian and leading expert on the southeastern Indians, the chunky stone disc and petroglyphs of Tugaloo, Georgia, have the same writing system as well. The Tugaloo glyphs show images of Bronze Age Scandinavian ships, which were used from 1700 to 500 BC. The Indus Valley connection. Now, I was following some of the conversation about the writing on this disc and picked up these comments from some linguists. The round stone appears to contain archaic cuneiform pictograph symbols. Now, cuneiform originates in the green area on that map, Mesopotamia. And also, they said, my first impression was a similarity to the Indus Valley script. Indus Valley is the blue area on the map, so this script likely originates somewhere in that region, and yet here we find it here in America. According to Richard Thornton, petroglyphs in Georgia, homeland of the Creeks, correspond with Bronze Age Scandinavians who had a previous connection to the Indus Valley. In other words, the Creek trace their roots to the Bronze Age Scandinavia and then go further back to the Indus Valley civilization. Ironically, that is the same general area the Jaredites came from. Interesting, huh? But there's more. Richard Thornton also says, Parowan Gap, Utah contains many petroglyphs that are not seen elsewhere in the Southwest, but are very common in North Georgia. Appalachia means the same thing in Creek that Parowan does in the Ute language. Obviously, Utah had visitors from Georgia. Here we can compare a ship typical of those from the Indus Valley to one from Georgia. Then the one on the bottom is a petroglyph from Parowan depicting the same type of boat, the Bronze Age Scandinavian Yort Spring. You won't see that if you go to Parowan Gap today. It's hidden inside a little cave secured by a locked gate. I was just fortunate enough to have taken that picture several years ago. Parowan, by the way, is only about 150 miles from Nantai, a relatively small distance geographically. Now, here's an interesting motif. In the upper corner is that little book that John Brewer described as having a scorpion on the front page. On the bottom left and center are other scorpions from Brewers Cave plates. The one on the right, though, comes from Pakistan. I think the similarity speaks for itself. Now, if you're wondering how we got from the Scandinavian Bronze Age to the Indus Valley and back here, the genetics lab at the University of Copenhagen has traced the blue eyes and red hair, or blonde hair, of Scandinavians to a people who once lived in the southeastern tip of Iran and were associated with the Indus Valley civilization. Similar scorpion images have been discovered in the Indus Valley, Pakistan, Iran, and Iraq. It just so happens that the Tower of Babel, where the Jaredites originated in 2200 BC, was located in modern-day Iraq during the height of the Indus Valley civilization. So let's take a little bit closer look at the Bronze Age. This is a Bronze Age Scandinavian mound with reconstructed stone paving. That's interesting because the Payson Mound in Utah that I mentioned earlier contained large skeletons. It was a complex of 5 to 7 mounds, all surrounded and connected by unique graveled walks. There were houses inside the Payson Mounds constructed of 18-inch adobe bricks, typical of those constructed during the Bronze Age. A sword expert told me that he was convinced that Brewers Cave was real when he saw the sword in the drawing. Most people would draw a more typical-looking sword with a handguard of some sort. This, however, is undoubtedly a Bronze Age sword, easily identified by the way the handle meets the blade. Here are a couple of photos of similar Bronze Age swords. One was discovered in Israel and the other in North Carolina. These came from Wayne May. Now, the scientific community wonders where all the copper came from that fueled the Bronze Age beginning about 2300 BC. The known sites for copper in the Old World do not produce anywhere near the amount of copper that was consumed at the time. So where were the abundantly producing copper mines? Actually, right here in America. The largest known quantities in the world of pure native copper were found on Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula. 500 million pounds of copper were mined from tens of thousands of pits on Isle Royal and the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan by ancient miners from 2400 BC to 900 BC, corresponding directly with the Bronze Age. Indian legends tell that the mining was done by fair-haired marine men. We learned earlier that the Navajo described the miners as a race of white giants. Curiously, the mining appears to have ended overnight as the workers had left for the day and never came back. Now, just for fun, pictured here is the world's largest glacial copper nugget weighing in at 28.2 tons. Next to that is a copper nugget weighing only about 3 tons. This is Michigan copper. All of the ancient copper culture tools in America that have been found could have been manufactured from just one large boulder. So, where did 500 million tons of ancient Michigan copper go? The amount of Indian trade copper in collections added to the estimated 20 to 30 tons that may still be undiscovered would not account for even 1% of the missing Michigan copper. Quoting Jay Wakefield, an expert on the subject, increasing evidence points to Michigan as the source of Bronze Age copper. For example, in the summer of 1982, 10 tons of copper ingots were recovered from the late Bronze Age shipwreck off the coast of Turkey. The copper was extraordinary in that it was more than 99.5% pure, unalloyed copper. The ingots were all brittle blister copper, made in multiple pourings outdoors over wood fires. Only Michigan copper is of this purity and is known to have been mined in enormous quantities during the Bronze Age using this method. Two characteristics of the ingots stand out: the presence of a substantial degree of porosity and a high concentration of copper oxide inclusions, which made it brittle. Simply dropping the ingots onto the hard surface would easily shatter them. Remember what J. Golden Barton said about the copper plates from Brewers Cave? Some of the copper plates were of a strange composition, shattering like glass into fibrous pieces if dropped. I wonder if they were made of Michigan copper. Barry Fell rewrote the cultural history of the Western Hemisphere with his book, Bronze Age America. The message was clear. Europeans, Africans, and Asians made routine yet historically unremembered visits to America for at least 3,000 years prior to Columbus's celebrated landfall. Could the people purported to have laid in the tomb in Manti be contemporaries of the descendants of the Bronze Age people, or maybe even Jaredites? That's what I wonder. This little ring, you can see one laying right there next to the female mummy. An authentication report was done on that. The evidence strongly suggests a manufacturing date older than 1200 BC, during the Bronze Age. Now, a Canadian Indian, guardian of his tribe's ancient records by right of ancestry, saw the Brewer plates and claimed that he could read them, as the knowledge had been passed down to him through the generations. Brewer, in order to test the man's ability, secretly took random plates from various boxes and put them together for him to read. If the Indian read easily from one to another, he would know the man was lying. The Indian looked through them and commented how strange it was that they didn't go together. One was a history, another spoke of burial practices, another of metals and chemistry, and so on. Brewer was so impressed that he gave the man a box of plates to keep. Someone translated portions of the plates, and John must have taken notes, inserting some of his own thoughts along the way. It's unknown whether it was the Canadian Indian or someone else, but pictured here are some of the notes in Brewer's own handwriting. One of the copper plates from Brewers Cave has a date of 2500 BC and tells of a migration, a voyage across the ocean of the Tiwa people under a leader called Pyron, who was a leader under a leader, for it was his brother who talked with God. John Brewer says, looking up, I find that they are known by a lot of names, but it adds up to what we know as Jaredites. So, if these are the records of the Tiwa people, known to us by Jaredites, and their leader, whom they call Pyron, it is notable that we find Pueblo people today calling themselves Pyro and Tiwa. In fact, Tiwa is also a language. Epicurus Pueblo says that Tiwa, the mother tongue, is not an Indian language, it is an ancient tongue, constructed according to the vibratory levels of Mother Nature. According to the ancients, the Creator created different languages, each with specific resonating qualities. The Native American tribes of Pyro and Tiwa can both trace their ancestry clear back to the Jaredite era. A Hopi Tiwa even said, my ancestors had white skins, but because of evil things that happened, we lost all that. This is really interesting because the Jaredites were the only people that we know of who kept the Adamic language, or the mother tongue. from the time of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of languages that we read about in the Bible. Now, notice here how the likeness on this plate refers to the female mummy. You can see her headdress and everything. The records from the cave spoke of battles and a war that devastated the nation. The few survivors carried records with them, which they secreted away in various places in the southwest. These were written in order of importance on gold, copper, brass, stone, and clay. Some of the records chronicled the life history of the deceased. These were always left with the body. Again, notice the inscription from the male mummy's flagstone is here on this plate. Some of the records chronicled the life history of the deceased. Some plates told of history ranging from as far back as Adam up to the time of the man who was buried there. A messenger from the south country has come. Enemies are looking for us. Records are to be gathered and packed. We shall take them with us. Some are to be buried with our old leader Light, for they are his life and his deeds. Now, I recently came across a surprising reference to Light Indians. I was looking at the names of the Utah counties when I discovered that the name Wasatch is a Light Indian word meaning mountain pass. I cannot find another reference to Light Indians, and I've looked quite a bit now. But I wonder if it is his descendants that called themselves by that name. This stone box was given to Paul Chessman, still sealed with juniper bark and pine pitch. When opened, there were 6 plates inside, including the 2 we previously viewed that had the mummies on them, or pertained to the mummies. These are various photos of the 6 plates from the stone box. Up to this point, there were a whole lot of questions in the saga of Brewers Cave. But finally, in 2005, the Ancient Historical Research Foundation took a sample of the juniper bark from the box for testing. And of course, you've seen that sitting up here. The test was run 10 times to be sure that the results were accurate. 10 times, they got the following results. Dr. Stephen Jones, physics professor at BYU, reports, with a radiocarbon age of 390 BC to 5 BC, the Brewer bark sample is thus scientifically demonstrated to be very old. The Brewer findings, if further verified, could force archaeologists to rewrite currently accepted history of the area. The bark used to cover the stone box in question is indeed ancient. It would be highly desirable to reopen the cave where the box was found with certified archaeologists present. Well, in order to reopen the cave with an archaeologist present, we have to relocate the cave. John Brewer covered it over, hid it very, very well. As mentioned before, he dynamited the entrance closed and then covered his little access. He said that you could walk right past it and not even see it. He also said that he didn't show it to anyone except his son, who died young. Many have searched for it, but the exact location is still unknown. However, Terry Carter has researched this subject, as I mentioned, for nearly 25 years, conducting interviews, compiling and retaining pertinent information. He's deciphered the clues regarding the location of Brewers Cave, combed the hills, and located a site in the area that matches the description, including the mark revealed to Maud Cox by George Keller, identifying the cave. An electromagnetic field test of the site revealed 3 voids in the target area, suggesting the possibility of a 3rd chamber unknown to John Brewer. Further scans have revealed squared corners. You can see that on the upper right corner if you look close. Inside a small chamber, Terry uncovered the remains of items John Brewer was known to have used in his cave. Candles, tools, blasting caps, dynamite, and even carpet. Remember that John was using to prepare for the visit by Paul Chessman. The next step, though, is to locate Brewer's small entrance, hopefully providing safe passage into the burial chamber to identify if it is indeed John Brewer's cave. John Brewer's claims are certainly plausible. Giants did roam this land of America. Tombs, skeletons, and artifacts have been discovered, and archaeological records verify them all across the nation. Metal records are not unknown in North America. Native histories, eyewitnesses, and tangible plates all verify their existence. Unreadable script and modern-looking inscriptions do not diminish the possibility of authentic ancient history inscribed on metal plates. Items discovered by John Brewer have been scientifically proven to be at least 2,000 to 3,000 years old. I still wonder, what did John Brewer actually stumble upon? He said, "I don't expect anybody to believe me, and I'm not worried either, because I know what I've got." So tonight I will leave you with this scripture. I say unto you that it is my will that you should obtain a knowledge of history and of countries and of kingdoms, and all this for the salvation of Zion. Thank you so much, everyone. I know it's late, and you've been a great audience. I hope something I've said will inspire you to continue your search for truth. And Mark, I'll turn the time back over to you.